Alrighty, so we are just past the hour, and since we have a shortened session today, and since it's during the lunch hour, I want to go ahead and get started. But I'm going to cover just a couple of housekeeping items first as folks hop on, and then we'll get into the content. So people will still have a minute or two here to get in. I'm Tessa Barron. I'm our Disaster Preparedness Program Associate at SVP, and today we're going to spend some time talking about renter preparedness, or disaster preparedness rather, for renters. So given the time of year, we're about a week and a half into hurricane season. So it's a really great time for us to talk about universal disaster preparedness tips for renter populations. So I'm going to give some examples here and there. They're not going to be just hurricane and flood specific, although I will give a couple of those again, given the time of year. But this is a presentation that we wanted to give folks for any time of the year for this to be a helpful resource for renters to refer back to get themselves better prepared. So with that, a housekeeping item or two, this is going to be a recorded presentation. So once we wrap up today, you can expect to receive an email with a survey link that I'll talk more about a little bit later on, that we would love for folks to take a minute to complete. And it will also have the webinar recording. So we'll be following up with that. So if anyone does it to jump early, please do not worry, we'll be following up. And then lastly, before we get into it, we have the chat function and the Q&A function going in this webinar. You're more than welcome to use both, but if you do have questions, I do ask that folks use the Q&A box, so that way, in case the chat gets lively, we don't lose any questions. So definitely want to make sure, and we do have a section at the end, rather, for Q&A. So if you could drop those questions in the Q&A box, we'll make sure that we get to those once we wrap up. So with all of that, we'll get into it. Before we start talking about the specific disaster preparedness tips for renters, I want to just give a quick intro of SVP for any folks in the call that might be new to the organization and might not totally know exactly what we do at SVP. So we are a disaster preparedness, a disaster resilience, a disaster recovery organization. So we work fully in the disaster space, and our main mission is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. So we started about 2 decades ago at this point in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And in our early days, SVP, our main focus was rebuilding, getting folks back into safe, sanitary, and secure housing. Well, in the almost 2 decades since our inception, our top leadership has recognized that if we really want to reach this main mission of reducing the time between disaster and recovery for disaster survivors, well, then we have to get more proactive. We have to work across the entire disaster spectrum, the full cycle, to get folks thinking about disaster preparedness throughout the entirety of the year. So that way we can reduce the need for recovery after an event. So as you can see here, I have little screenshots of our 5 different program areas. And so our first is build. We do still do a lot of rebuilding today. It does make up the majority of the work that we do across the org. But like I said, we work across the full disaster spectrum now, so we can be as proactive as we can possibly be. So we have a share portion of our organization, and that's our in-house grant foundation, a preparedness pillar, which is where I am situated, and that's what we'll be talking more about today. We have an advisory arm, which is our government advisory portion of the organization, and an advocate program, which does a lot of work with disaster survivors, and particularly increasing FEMA, working with survivors to go through the FEMA appeals process to maximize their FEMA award amount. It's one thing they do of many different great initiatives. So that's a quick overview of who we are at SVP, but I welcome you to check out our website for more information about some of the specific work that we do across these 5 orgs. But for the sake of time, since we have a condensed session, I want to go ahead and get into it. So in our Prepare program, we work across a variety of different audience sets. So we work with households, and that's both homeowners and renters. With our presentation today, it's a perfect example of that. We work with different intermediaries in communities. So whether that's nonprofits that are in the disaster space or that are just adjacent to disaster work and that want to learn more about how to best prepare their communities. We do work with local officials in communities, and also, lastly, our last audience group is businesses, a lot of business continuity trainings. So we do what we can to try to equip communities as a whole with knowledge and capacity to make more informed disaster preparedness decisions, because ultimately what we're trying to do here is build towards more disaster resilient communities and build towards a culture of preparedness. We have some really great resources on our website that I encourage you to check out. These are checklists and printed guides and some really great resources that'll help you walk through your own preparedness planning. So again, encourage you to check that out. But I do want to go ahead and get into our content here. So we're going to be covering a handful of different actions that renters can take to get prepared. And the first is knowing your risks. It's equally important to understand what your risks are, whether you own your home or whether you're a renter. And so across the country, we see that unfortunately more than 18 million rental units are at risk from extreme weather. And so this includes flooding and hurricanes, but this also spans a wide variety of different disaster types. And so because of that, we really want to encourage homeowners and renters alike to understand your risks, understand what you could potentially be dealing with, so then you can get prepared adequately. We know that we're in this period of time that's characterized by these disaster events that are more frequent and more intense. And while we can't stop that, we can do everything in our power to equip ourselves with knowledge and information to get prepared. And so it starts with knowing your risks. So our top recommendation at SBP is this really nifty tool called riskfactor.com. Risk Factor is a tool that was developed by the First Street Foundation. And with this tool, households can go in and plug in either their zip code or their address. So it will give you individualized data on your individual level of risk. So you can look up again zip code or address, and you'll get a risk score. So a rating, a score of 1 to 10 for your particular level of risk when it comes to extreme heat, extreme wind, wildfire, and flooding. So this is a really great tool that's going to give you a comprehensive look at what you might be dealing with come different types of disaster seasons throughout the year. So definitely something that I would I would flag, keep saved for you to continually refer back to throughout the year. So a really great tool, riskfactor.com. So that's the first part of knowing your risks and understanding what you could be dealing with. But we also want to make sure that folks have the information that they need to stay safe as disasters are imminent. So as storms and disasters are approaching, it's important to stay plugged into different information sources so you could stay in the know. So this includes things like your local news and your weather apps, which probably are already downloaded on your phone. Maybe there are some local emergency apps that you can download, emergency alerts that your community distributes when disasters are incoming. Or NOAA's weather radio is a really great resource that's battery powered. So in the event that you lose power, this is a really great tool to help you stay plugged in. If you need to evacuate, if you need to hunker down and shelter in place, you want to have you want to know that you need to do that in time to act to stay safe. So Risk Factor is a great forward-looking tool, but the other side of the coin is knowing what's happening when it's happening so you can, again, act to stay safe. And so the best way to stay informed about your risks is using Risk Factor and familiarizing yourself with these, again, emergency alerts, local news, weather apps, etc. So I want to encourage folks to check that out in advance. Moving along to making a preparedness plan, we have this bucketed into 4 different emergency planning basics. This is our supplies, communication information, evacuation, and sheltering guidance. Here's a really great list that we've compiled of different basic necessities that we want folks to have on hand, if possible, in the face of any type of storm event. We know when it comes to renters, typically we're dealing with a limited amount of space in a home. So when you see this list, there are workarounds to making sure that you can have these supplies on hand. So this could be as simple as compiling your disaster supplies in a box and storing it under your couch or storing it under your bed or another piece of large furniture. So there are certainly ways to work around having limited space so you can make sure that you have what you need should you be dealing with any type of storm event. I want to highlight just a few items here before moving on. There are a couple important things that we want folks to be gathering in advance, and that is about 3 weeks is what our recommendation is. 3 weeks worth of food, non-perishable food, and bottled water. Bottled water. And then, of course, if you have any family specific needs, maybe you have elderly grandparents living with you, or if you have an infant or any pets, there are, of course, different types of supplies that you'll need, whether that's medications, whether that's diapers, baby formula, maybe your pet has different medications. So we want to make sure that you have food and water, but then also you're accounting for any family specific needs. We'll talk more about power a little bit later on in the presentation, but having things like battery powered flashlights, radios, backup batteries is a really crucial element for your disaster supplies kit. And before moving on to our next section here, I just want to emphasize that with renter populations, generators, it just might not always be feasible for you to have a generator and for you to use it in the event that you lose power. There are other great options and workarounds like portable power stations, and also things to explore like battery powered charging devices, portable charging stations, and things of that nature. Granted, for the situation, in the event they're using a portable power station, it might be problematic once you lose power because those are, they need to be charged up in advance, but it's a really great starting point. And this presentation really is an exploratory look, an introductory look at different things that renters can consider to get themselves prepared. So moving on here, I know sometimes when we present lists of disaster supplies, they can be long, they can seem cost prohibitive, and at first blush, it really can seem like it's out of your control. There's only so much money to go around, and we want to make sure that we have food to put on our tables. But having disaster supplies it's really critical to our safety as we deal with different types of disaster events throughout the year. So with that being said, we've compiled a couple of different approaches for folks to consider to pull together your disaster supplies kits in an affordable way. So I'm not going to go over everything in this list, but just to highlight two different examples. The first, and this is an approach that I use myself, is spreading out purchases throughout the year. So maybe this means you'll take advantage of different holiday sales. Maybe you'll have a list and you'll check it off throughout the year as different items go on sale. What's important with this approach is that it just requires some planning in advance. So spreading out purchases, again, is a really great way to make these kits in a more affordable way, but you have to have that planning aspect. You have to have some forethought to make sure that throughout the year, it's on the forefront of your mind and you are still grabbing these items as they go on sale. The other approach that I want to emphasize is that some states participate in sales tax holidays. When I follow up with everyone, I will be sending a link that you guys can click on and you can look to see if you live in a participating state. But for those of you that do, they're often categorized in different themes, and disaster preparedness is one of them. So with that being the case, if you live in a participating state, this would be a really great time for you to get those bigger ticket items like a generator, like a portable power station, and anything along those lines, because that's a period of time that there is no sales tax on certain items. So that's definitely something I want to draw folks' attention towards. And again, I'll be sending a resource for you to check that out after we wrap up today. Emergency plans are an important piece of the puzzle. Disasters they're very hectic events. And so we want to make sure that we're equipping folks with tools and resources to make them as predictable as possible. If we have a plan in place, if we know how to act, well, that's going to help us stay safe. That's going to help us move quickly and get out of harm's way as fast as we can. And so a couple things here, when we're talking about our emergency plan, this is consider this to be our actionable items. So, to give you an example of the first one, we just looked at a list of different emergency supplies that we really want to encourage folks to have on hand during disasters. Well, the actionable piece here is who in your family, or if maybe you live with roommates, what roommate is going to be in charge of checking your disaster supplies kit annually and restocking any of the items that might be missing. To give another example, we just looked at some important apps and emergency apps and news and weather apps to download in advance. Our action item here is who in your family, or who, between you and your roommates, is going to be in charge of monitoring each app and sharing out information with everyone, so everyone knows, what it is happening, what storm is coming, and what actions need to be taken to stay safe. Another thing here is that it's just so important to keep these plans updated. So whether or not you are re-signing your lease and staying in the same area, you may think that that might not warrant, a practicing of your family plan. But maybe you brought in a pet. Maybe there's some other types of change to your family dynamic, and that, whatever those changes are, we need to be practicing this plan to make sure it counts for our family's specific needs. So moving on, now we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about making a recovery plan. This is so important because our ability to be financially prepared for disasters underpins every single aspect of recovery. And so we want to be thinking in advance, how can I financially get myself in a good place? So if I am impacted by a disaster, I can rebound, I can recover as fast as I possibly can. So here are a couple actions that renters absolutely can participate in. Things like making a home inventory, so going around your apartment, your rental property, and taking pictures and videos of your belongings. Simple, easy, doesn't cost any money, just takes some time. Saving for deductibles. We'll talk about insurance in a slide here, but there is this common misconception that renters cannot obtain flood insurance. That is not true. Renters absolutely can get flood insurance coverage, and that's content only coverage. We'll get into that in a slide. But if you are a renter that does have flood insurance in the form of contents only coverage, well, in order to be able to receive that insurance payout, you have to be able to pay that deductible out of pocket. So, an important piece of your recovery plan and of preparing your finances for disasters is to save for those deductibles and to have that money, again, to be able to put towards your deductible. And then lastly, collecting, organizing, and protecting important documents. This includes things like our financial records, our medical information, family contact information. Having this info on hand is going to help expedite the process of putting in an insurance claim, or applying for federal aid, or for staying in touch with loved ones in a disaster. So important, easy things that don't cost money, just takes time, and it takes some planning in advance. So those are some key tips for making a recovery plan. When it comes to getting insurance, getting the right insurance, we want to make sure that renters know that they absolutely can obtain flood insurance coverage. I am getting a little bit ahead of myself here, so let me back up for 1 second and say the first step that we want to urge renters to take is take a moment and go through your renter's insurance policy. There might be some technical jargon in there, so make sure you're dedicating some time to making sure you really understand what is covered in your renter's insurance policy. Understanding what is covered is also going to clue you in on what's not covered. And so you likely will see some gaps there that will need to be filled. Those gaps will be able to be filled with a flood insurance policy. And so, like I said before, that's going to be your contents only coverage. Conceptually, this makes sense. As a renter, you don't own your home, and so you are not responsible for getting the coverage for the structure of your home itself. What is most important to you and what's within your control is getting coverage for your belongings, hence contents only coverage. And what's great about that is that it's much cheaper than a full policy. When I say full policy, picture a homeowner's insurance policy, a flood insurance policy, where they would be insuring the structure and the contents. Again, you're just dealing with insuring your contents. And so, a really great thing that we want renters to know. So moving along here, we're now going to talk about a couple of easy entry points and different actions that renters can take to prepare their homes. The first is understanding your rental agreement. We know across the country that renters experience a high level of disaster risks, and so this is a key part of being prepared. This is so important, whether you are signing your lease for the first time or if you're re-signing. We really want to make sure that renters are talking to your landlord. You know who is responsible for what when it comes to annual maintenance actions and when it comes to repairs for storm-related damage. So our recommendation here is not only to have an in-depth conversation with your landlord, but also to really take the time to review your policy, to read through that document and make sure that you're wrapping your head around, everything that's included in your rental agreement. And again, who is responsible for what. So I want to give a quick example here. Let's say a renter is responsible for putting sandbags near the doorway. So, in this example, we're talking about hurricane and flood events. Or maybe a renter is responsible for laying out salt. So, in that situation, we'd be talking about winter storms and freezing weather. Well, it's important for you to know that it's your responsibility to lay the sandbags, to lay the salt, but maybe your landlord might be responsible for supplying the sandbags, for supplying the salt. So this is important information about the process that we want to make sure that you know before, whatever disaster it might be, before it's approaching. So that way, when a disaster comes, when a storm event comes, you don't have to spend time learning about what your responsibilities, what your role is. You already know it. And so you can just act. So, additional actions we want to encourage folks to take pre-disaster for any disaster are as follows. I'm going to cover a couple that are universal for different types of disaster events. But it's important, I just want to emphasize here that while renters don't own their homes, they absolutely can engage in different actions to reduce risks and to mitigate the damage that disasters often bring. And so this can include things like moving valuable items off of your ground floor. Maybe we're talking about a flood event in that situation, and we want to make sure that your belongings don't get ruined. Bringing loose outdoor items that are yours inside. So maybe this is grills, potted plants, lawn furniture, anything that could become a dangerous projectile in a high wind event. Or maybe we're talking about a wildfire event and we want to make sure that we're bringing things inside that could be flammable. So we're reducing the impact right off the bat. Disconnecting electrical appliances. I'll share in just a slide or two here some information about power outages, but it's important to know power outages can happen with any type of storm event. So this is an important one for us to have in the forefront of our minds. And then closing interior windows and doors. This is important for, across different types of disaster events, whether it's high wind, or maybe we're talking about another example is a wildfire. We don't want that smoke to get into the household that could cause an inhalation issue. And so here are just a couple examples of different things that renters can do. But the take-home point here is that renters absolutely can engage in actions to keep their property safe. And so here again are a couple examples. Okay, so here is that power outage slide that I was alluding to. Again, power outages can happen with any type of disaster event. And so it's really critical that you're thinking through in advance of a disaster, how am I going to make sure that I'm taking care of my energy needs? Should I be impacted by a power outage? Should I lose power? So I did mention this already, but to reiterate, unplugging appliances and electronics around your property, having a backup power source. We talked about generators. If that works for you and for where you live, that's wonderful. If not, again, there are other things to consider, like a portable charging station or a battery-powered energy charging device. So thinking through in advance, what makes sense for where I live and what's going to meet my family, or again, if you live with roommates or if you live by yourself, what's going to meet those energy needs. And if a generator is the most logical, if it makes the most sense for you, then understanding generator safety it should not be overlooked. It is very important, and that's something that we want to make sure that folks are doing in advance. Okay, and wrapping up here, and I'm going to be kind of speedy, but it's very important for us to understand that a key part of being prepared is knowing what to do post disaster. And so this includes, say if you get impacted by a disaster event, hopefully you don't, but in the event that you do, after it's safe to get back in your property. The first step is inspecting your apartment or your rental property and seeing if you did incur any type of disaster damage. If you did, it's important to know that you are entitled to property repairs following a disaster. So if you did if you did deal with any type of disaster damage, you absolutely are entitled to getting that fixed up. If that is a situation that you're dealing with, what's critical here is to document everything. So you're going to want to submit a written request for repairs. Documentation is so important here. And so having a paper trail of your requests, and also just going ahead and asking your landlord for a repair timeline, just so you're armed with that information, it'll go a long way. With this idea of documentation being key, if you do need to leave your apartment for a period of time, we want to keep these lines of communication very strong. Give a written notice, whether that's, well, I would suggest email. You could also do certified mail, but notifying your landlord if you do need to leave for a period of time. Now, wrapping up here, some additional guidance that we want to make sure folks are aware of is this idea of understanding your lease termination rights. So if your property does sustain pretty significant damage from a disaster event, it's important to know that both you and your landlord have the right to terminate that lease if, again, it sustained a serious level of damage and the property is uninhabitable. You can't live there. If your landlord is going to terminate that lease, we're talking again about the importance of documentation. They have to give you written notice. So you want to be aware of that. If we're talking about a disaster event that resulted in significant damage, it's important to know that you do have the right to vacate the property. And if that's the case, you're entitled to a refund of your rent paid from when you moved out and a return of your security deposit. So this is information that post event might be hard to, you're dealing with a traumatic event, you're dealing with recovering from that. You might not know exactly what it means to terminate your lease, if you even can. So having this information at the forefront of your mind is so important. And then lastly, just want to make sure that folks are aware of the fact that your landlord might not, in all cases, be required to pay for storm-related damage to your personal property. So this goes right back to the importance of having your proper flood insurance coverage. Remember, that's contents only coverage. So that way you're filling any gaps that might currently exist in your coverage, and you're having what the coverage that you need to recover and get yourself to a good place post-event. So I know that's a lot of information. I'll be sharing my contact information in just a slide or two here. But this is going to be recorded, so you're welcome to refer back to this. We will have more information going out on our website. We'll have more webinars in the near future about renter preparedness. But we wanted to just start you all off today with some good entry points to getting prepared and to staying safe during disaster season. So with that, if folks wouldn't mind just taking a minute to complete a survey, we are going to be picking a winner for a generator that was generously donated from EcoFlow, which is a partner of our organizations. We'll be picking a winner from across a couple different recent household webinars that we have done. So please, we encourage you to take that survey so you can get entered to win. And wrapping up here, our key actions, like we talked about, are understanding risks, taking a look at riskfactor.com and downloading those emergency weather apps, news apps, any local alerts in advance so you could stay in the know, making that preparedness plan. And we have a really long planning guide. It's long, but it's important. It includes all the information that you need to know, and that's on our website and can get printed. Preparing your home and knowing that there are actions that you can take to get yourself ready for disasters, and learning those renter rights, because remember, an important part of being prepared is knowing how to recover. All right, so with that, I know we're just at time, and I apologize for that, but I will be staying on for a few extra minutes. If folks do have questions, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A box, or to write down this email here and follow up with any questions that you do have.
Tessa, we do have one question right now. Is this the same generator from last meeting?
Yes. Yeah. So it is the same one that's getting raffled across a couple different webinars. This is the last one. So we will be picking that winner. Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you. Tessa, we're getting information that they're not receiving the shot. So I don't know if there's something that you're seeing on your side that could unlock it for them so they can have access to that survey.
Oh, okay. How peculiar. I'm so sorry about that, guys. In that case, don't worry about it. I'll be following up via email this afternoon once we jump off. So I'll be sharing that survey. So if you guys could take a minute once you receive that email, and my apologies again about those tech difficulties. Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. But thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate it. I know it's that lunch hour, so thanks for hanging with us and learning important information for us as renters, homeowners, households, whatever your situation might be. And please keep a lookout for an email from my end with more information. And again, reach out if you have any questions as they pop up. I'm more than happy to chat in more depth about anything that I talked about today. So thank you all again. Really appreciate it.